Hi everyone, my name is Richard and I will be providing an introduction to Lesson 1, Documenting Your Mission. The guiding question for this lesson is, what are the key objectives in NASA's Artemis program and how can students apply documentation practices to keep track of their mission to the moon? You can see that this table shows the lessons, the units, and the mission objectives for the Artemis Roads 3 challenge. Lesson 1 and Mission Objective 1 are the very first lessons in the Understanding the Mission unit. All of the lesson plans in our companion course program are formatted using the 5E learning cycle, which you can see listed on the slide. Although it should be called the 6E learning cycle because there is an optional E called Extend. In the following slides, I will be guiding you through the 6 E's for Lesson 1. Okay, so let's get started with the first E. Engage. The main learning objective of the Engage section is for students to understand that NASA has a goal to put humans back on the moon. Toward this end, we are asking your students to read or listen to NASA's first women graphic novels, which you can see pictured here on the slide. As they are reading or listening to the comics, we want them to write down any questions that come up for them related to NASA's moon missions. Then the class will work together to compile a class question board, and you can see an example of a class question board here. The hope is that as you move through the student challenge and the lessons, you will refer back to the class question board and you'll work together to answer the students' questions. To prepare for this section, you may want to consider listening to the first women graphic novels yourself and write down any questions that come up for you. Or at the very least, make sure you skim this list of example questions that we compiled so you can get an idea for the type of questions that may come up for your students. You should also decide what format you will use for the class question board. Do you have a bulletin board you can use, a large area on your whiteboard, sticky notes on a poster board, or do you want to use a virtual option, so something like Padlet? You can see that the materials you'll need will depend on what format you decide to use, and your students are going to need school laptops in order to access the website with the links to the first women graphic novels. The next E is Explore. The main learning objective of this section is for your students to learn about NASA's Artemis missions. Students will do this in two parts. In the first part, we're asking them to play an Artemis 3 Loteria game that we developed, and you can see that pictured here. In part 2, we're asking them to review NASA resources in our Getting Up to Speed with Artemis document. To prepare for this section, you will want to review the Loteria game ahead of time and make sure you know the rules for how to play it. You should also decide which way you will play the Loteria game. Will you use a physical printed version of the game, or will you use our online game version? The materials you'll need will depend on what version of the Loteria game you decide to play. So if you're playing the printed physical version, you'll need to gather those materials, so the playing boards, the deck of cards, and markers. And if you're using the online game, make sure each of your students has a laptop so they can access the game, or some electronic device. They'll also need a laptop in order to access the Getting Up to Speed with Artemis document. The next D is Explain. In Explain, students will learn about the mission objectives, and they'll identify their funds of knowledge that are relevant for each mission objective. As you can see, a deliverable for a mission objective 1 is students' funds of knowledge. To prepare for this section, review the concept of funds of knowledge and make sure that you're prepared to explain it to your students. If you have time, we also recommend that you review the MO-1 pager and the challenge manual. Materials that you'll need for this section, you'll need to print out the mission objective and funds of knowledge worksheet, at least one per student, or make sure that students have a device so they can access the Google Doc and make a copy for themselves. Students will also need a device to access the MO-1 pager link and the challenge manual link. In the Elaborate section, students will learn about the science and engineering notebooks and the mission development log. Make it clear to students that each individual student will have their own science and engineering notebook that they will use to document all of their work. Students will then work in teams of 4 to 6 to create one team mission development log. We've identified some storybooks that you might want to use in your lesson plan to give your students examples of science and engineering notebooks. So we recommend that before this lesson, you check these books out from your local library to have them available for your students. In this section, students will also review examples of MDLs from last year's student challenge. Again, we recommend that if you have time, you skim the previous MDL examples, especially if this is your first time participating in an SB student challenge. In terms of materials, make sure that your students have a way to access the website link to explore previous MDL examples. So in the previous E, students learned about the science and engineering notebooks and their mission development logs. In this E, called Evaluate, students will actually start their SENs and their MDLs. So before this lesson, you should decide if students will do a hard copy MDL or an electronic MDL, or if you're going to give them the choice. Whichever you choose, you will need to gather notebooks or school laptops for them to use. For MO-1, starting their MDL is a mission objective deliverable, so make sure to check out the MO-1 deliverables list in the challenge manual for specific requirements. The optional extend for Lesson 1 is for students to explore more examples of science and engineering notebooks. All of our companion course lessons align with state standards. Science and engineering practices for Lesson 1 are listed on this slide. As you can see, students are going to be asking questions in Engage, so remember the class question board that I mentioned earlier. And then in all of the E's for this lesson, students will be obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. Lesson 1 also aligns with English Language Arts Common Core standards, and it aligns with Standard 1 of the Social Emotional Learning Standards. We estimate that to enact this full lesson, it will take approximately 4 hours and 10 minutes, and that's broken down as you see here on this table for each E. However, if your students know about the NASA's Artemis missions, then you can probably expedite the Engage and Explore sections. Additionally, if your students participated in last year's student challenge, then you could potentially expedite the Elaborate section if they are well acquainted with what a mission development log is. So, an expedited lesson estimate time is around 90 minutes. So that's all from me for this Lesson 1 introduction. We recommend that you go to our NSB website and click on these icons so you can learn more about Lesson 1 and Mission Objective 1. Thank you.